marriage bill is something which has been in the pipeline for a number of years, but it is now being pushed forward at a fast pace through Parliament, and so we need to be ready to oppose it. I'm going to start off with just an explanation of what happened, of how Rome won Spain, which is that they besieged the capital city of Spain and they were beaten off. And so what they did is that they retreated, and then they came back later the same day, but this time later they came only from three sides. They attacked from three sides and they left the north side without any attackers. So all the defenders inside the capital city, which was called New Carthage, then went to defend where the Romans were attacking, and they left the north side of the city undefended. Then what happens is that the Romans secretly sneaked up and jumped over the wall, opened the gates, and moved their army into the city. And so they captured it because the people were not ready for them on the north face. And I think that many of us have been fighting for the last year on some other issues, such as the Basic Education Laws Amendment Bill, on the Spy Bill, and many of the other attacks on our freedom and faith. But this is something which they are suddenly moving on, and we have to be mobilized and ready to defend. Otherwise, we're at risk. So there's the picture of the Romans storming that undefended wall. We do not want to let this wall be undefended. And I would like to ask all of you after this meeting to go and contact your friends and tell them to be ready. Get them to watch this video on where I understand it's going to be streamed on YouTube. Now, what is our authority? Why do we say that marriage is the union of a man and a woman? Well, firstly, we've got the Bible. Secondly, we've got the United Nations Declaration of Universal Declaration of Human Rights, to which almost all countries are signatories. And we've got history, which has been the case for as long as time began. Before all other institutions of human government, marriage has been between a man and a woman. The only exceptions to that have been when one's had madmen like the Emperor Nero, who thought that he could also put his horse in the parliament. Now, South Africa at the moment has marriage laws, which includes the Marriage Act, which is one man, one woman. It's essentially Christian-based. Then there's customary marriage, which allows for African polygamous marriage with one man with multiple wives. Then in 2005, the Constitutional Court, in rebellion against God, as the President Kenneth Meshu has said that it's possible to have marriage between a man and another man or two women, and they had the Civil Union Act, which used the word marriage. Then just recently, the Constitutional Court has ruled that Parliament must accommodate Muslim divorces, and those include polygamous marriages. So there's the question of how that is going to be done. Now, there's three alternatives which Home Affairs considered, and the first one is the Unitary Marriage Act, which is to have one act for polygamy, same-sex marriage, and monogamous traditional real marriage. Then the second option is was an Omnibus Act, which was one act with many chapters. So you'd then have a chapter for polygamous marriage, a chapter for same-sex marriage, and a chapter. And then the third option is to have separate acts, which is what we've got at the moment, which is the least damaging. The one that they're proposing at the moment is the Unitary Marriage Act, which is the worst. Now, the one that they've got proposed puts so-called same-sex marriage, and I always use it so-called because there's no such thing as same-sex marriage. It's a fiction, just like I don't believe in unicorns, I don't believe in same-sex marriage. And they're also proposing that any marriage can become polygamous. And so a man can then take another wife. And so they're trying to put a one-size-fits-all approach. Now, the impacts of this would be that any man could take a second wife, and they are saying, well, the wife wouldn't have to, his existing wife would have to give consent to that. But what woman in her right mind is going to give such consent? I think that is unlikely, but women are often in a weak negotiating position. They can be threatened economically, they can be threatened with divorce, and women in a weak position can be pressurized to do that. Then there are religious freedom risks. We've already had many Christian wedding venue owners being forced to close their businesses because they refuse to host same-sex marriages. We've got moral confusion education, and the law is a great educator. So the thing is that if it talks about marriage with this kind of confusion, that sets a norm to degrade what is real marriage that should be honored by everybody. Then, in terms of the actual proposals that they are putting forward, they have made this new proposal less aggressive than what they originally proposed back last year in July 2023, which I think is possibly due to the pressure that we're putting on them. Firstly, they've removed the proposal so that a woman can marry many men. And secondly, they've put in a clause for no coercion of religious marriage officers, which is 11.4. But there's no protection still for state marriage officers, and that can be removed, as was the conscientious objection clause in the Civil Union Bill that they put in, promising us nothing bad would happen in 2006. Then they removed it in 2019. Otherwise, there would be no distinction, as there is at the moment, between so-called same-sex marriage and real marriage. Then there's also the risk that some pastors are saying, okay, well, I'm just going to do a religious marriage and I won't be a state marriage officer anymore. But that would make things even worse, because they put a 5-year jail sentence for conducting a marriage if you're not a marriage officer. So that's not a good idea. Now, I want to draw an analogy, which is the start of the Second World War, which was what happened to Czechoslovakia. Now, Czechoslovakia is surrounded by mountains and it has natural borders. But Germany said, well, we just want to annex a little piece of Czechoslovakia, and that will stop us from going any further. Then we won't have a war anymore. And Neville Chamberlain, who was a very naive, foolish prime minister at the time, waved a piece of paper to the British people and said, well, this is signed by Adolf Hitler, and that means that he will give us peace in exchange for just taking the blue area. Now, the question is, can we trust them to not go any further and leave our pastors in peace? Personally, I don't trust these people. They said they were going to leave state marriage officers in peace, and they didn't. And I don't trust them to leave pastors in peace either. I would also put forward the argument that any defensive system needs to be multi-layered. And this is a picture of the walls of Constantinople, which was the most fortified city in the world of the medieval period. Several different walls. But for your own home, you know that if you only have one defense, such as you have a dog, well, the burglar can get past that and throw a piece of meat at the dog. So one wants to have multiple defenses. You want to have your electric fence, you want to have your burglar bars, you want an armed response as much as possible. And this would weaken the situation as what it is at the moment. So I say we don't give that opportunity for them to weaken our defenses, which is what they would be doing. Now, this is a social experiment which nobody has ever tried in any country in the history of the world. And I think we need to wake up the politicians from the other political parties to realize South Africa is being used as an experimenting ground. The question is, no other country has had same-sex marriage plus polygamy plus gender change all in the same law, legal system. And already we can see that the results have not been good, but this is going to make it worse. Now, we had in 2005 the Constitutional Court ruling of so-called same-sex marriage, then the Civil Union Act, which flowed from that, which the majority of the ruling party, including the Minister of Home Affairs at the time, totally opposed this whole idea of same-sex marriage. I know that there was very strong opposition. I've heard it from multiple sources in the ANC caucus. But everybody was asleep in 2019 when the Civil Union Amendment Act got pushed through. Then we've had this consultation with Home Affairs and with the Law Reform Commission. And now we've got this marriage bill in 2023, which has been slightly improved, but not much. Now, I've got a graph here of the marriage rate in South Africa over the last period in between when they started introducing all of this nonsense. This is what it was in the beginning in 2004 when all this sex education was introduced in schools. And this is in then you can see 2007 when same-sex marriage became effective. Then 10 years later, 2017, the rate of marriage in this country had dropped by 40%. The birth rate hadn't dropped, so that means more children born outside of marriage. That means social impacts, more children drop out of school, low marks, gangs, drugs, poverty, teen pregnancy, social grants. Home Affairs is being incredibly foolish. The ruling party is concerned about solving social problems. This is going to make it much worse. They don't have enough money in their bank accounts to pay out all the social grants that they're going to need to pay out from all the damage that they're doing to the family. And we can see this measured year on year. If any company started making a loss like this, the board of directors would be calling them in, the shareholders would be firing the CEO and saying, no, something is wrong here. Now, what are they doing? They're proposing to mix clean water and dirty water. Now, can you drink that water? Can you trust it to drink it anymore? This is putting moral confusion into the minds of the public, into the law at every point, and so that wicked people can win court cases against godly people. And godly people can be discriminated against in schools. This is similar to counterfeit of money. Here, the thing is that you can go to jail for 15 years for counterfeiting money. Now, here they are fraudulently counterfeiting marriage. The same-sex marriage is not marriage at all. It's just a mockery of marriage. Now, they've got a whole lot of deceitful arguments, and I'm going to outline what our answers are to all of them. They keep bringing up the same arguments, but they are easily answered, and they're complete nonsense. But please educate people how to answer all these things. We don't just answer them from the Bible. Yes, we use the Bible, but there are other answers to these questions too. Firstly, the argument that they need to do this for the sake of the Muslim divorce ruling by the Constitutional Court in 2022. The answer to that is that the Muslims have all said they do not want this bill and it doesn't satisfy their requirements or what was ordered by the Constitutional Court. Now, this is what is called a bait and switch scam. So, in other words, it's an illegal practice where you advertise something to get people to come into your shop. And once they get into your shop, you don't have enough to give the people. So maybe you've got one article at the extra cheap price, and then you try and get them to buy something more expensive. It's a scam. It's fraud. Just like printing money is fraud. Now, the next argument is that this is in the Constitution. Now, we have to ask a couple of questions. Firstly, there are two words in the Constitution, sexual orientation, and they are now stretching the meaning of these two words to include just about anything. And since that word is undefined in the Constitution, they can make those two words mean absolutely anything. And who knows what in future somebody might say they have a sexual orientation with. I've seen medical papers where people say they have a sexual orientation that they they are attracted to people who dress up in animal costumes. That is called the furry orientation. It's nuts. But who decided that went into the constitution? Actually, these two men, Albie Sachs and Kader Asmal. That's all. It didn't have a lot of support from the rest of the ruling party. And in fact, the Democratic Alliance at the time had different wording that they were proposing. Then, so the answer is we don't need this bill. It's not required by the Constitution, but they are just keep on reading in more and more into this elastic, open-ended two words, which actually need to be removed from the Constitution. Then there's the claim that we mustn't bias Christianity because or monogamy. Now, the answer to that is the example of India, and India is a country of 1 billion people, of which only 2% are Christians. In 1955, they declared they abolished polygamy for all except for Muslims. So it shows other countries can do it. The Christians took the lead, and so then the Hindus said, "Okay, well, this makes sense. We need to do this as well." The next argument is that they say they're just tidying up fragmented laws. Now, this is nonsense. The current laws that we have on marriage were made for very carefully thought out reasons, which did not include what they're proposing at the moment. It was a compromise reached in 2006, and the ruling party and the government opposed same-sex marriage at the time. They did the minimum that they could do to comply with the requirements of the Constitutional Court, just because they didn't have an appetite for a showdown at the time. Furthermore, in terms of customary law, polygamy is vanishing. It's only being practiced amongst a small elite in KwaZulu-Natal. Just about everywhere else, it's disappearing. And even amongst that elite, it's, most of them are following the example of Chief Buthelezi to going for one woman marriage. So then the next argument is democracy. Now, nobody voted the sexual orientation into the Constitution. There was no vote on same-sex marriage. Parliament didn't support this. They were coerced. And when the polls were made at the time of the legalization of same-sex marriage, they couldn't find enough people to even register on the polls. Sometime later, they managed to find 1% in favor of it. It's really almost nobody supports this thing. So they are just imagining things. Then the argument of African culture. Now, African culture does not support same-sex marriage, and that culture is already accommodated in the law. They don't need to change the law to accommodate African culture. Then there's the argument of international law and the claim that they need to comply with the law against discrimination against women. They think somehow this new law is going to benefit women. I don't agree, but here we have all the countries except the red ones have signed the same international law agreement, but how many of those have got a law like we're proposing? Well, none of them have a law like what we're proposing. Some of them have same-sex marriage. Some of them have polygamy. That is, a minority have one of those two other types of marriage, but none of them have both of them together. So this is a new experiment that they are imagining needs. So really, all of these arguments are nonsense. They are making this up. And we have to say this is mythology. They are deceiving people. It's bait and switch. And this whole idea of same-sex marriage is also an invention. It is a figment of their imagination and goes along with other myths that form part of the woke religion, such as the idea you can change gender or that unborn people are not people. We do not believe in these myths, and South Africa shouldn't be forced to either. So we need constitutional amendments to recognize in humble submission to Almighty God, which was in the previous constitution. We need to delete sexual orientation because we can see now all the evils that have flowed from that. We need to define marriage as between a man and a woman only. And we can point to, for example, Zimbabwe, our neighbor, which has a clause in their constitution to say that. Now, I would like to thank President Kenneth Meshu for speaking up in defense of Sean Christie earlier this year, and we won that fight. The university backed down. They found him not guilty of hate speech. He is completing his law degree. And that was important to speak up on that. It's just an example of how this woke agenda can be defeated. Now, the opportunities that we have, this is going to go to all provinces, but the first provinces that are planned for are being planned in Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal. Those are provisional dates, and they could change, and I will let everybody know as soon as we have the final dates, but we need to start planning and mobilizing people for those provisional dates, because that is only 2 weeks away, and a lot of people are completely asleep on this issue at the moment. So the process is that this is at the National Assembly. They want to consult the provinces now. It was started just before the election, this process, and I personally believe the committee should start again, because most people were not aware of that process just before the election. It was rushed through while everybody was sleeping. And I am sad to say there was no church organization made any submission to that, which shows that they didn't properly publicize that. Then we'll go to the National Council of Provinces and then to the president. But I hope that this thing will be trashed. This is a photograph from the Cape Town March for Marriage 2006. Protect the sanctity of marriage between one man and one woman, and I believe we need to mobilize that again. So please go and talk to people that you know. I know word of mouth is absolutely the best way of mobilizing people, but you can also send a link to this presentation to educate those people. But please ask pastors that you know, mobilize their congregations to pray, to speak up, to go to these hearings, and we can also speak up in that parliamentary committee if you're a parliamentarian.
Well, thank you for that wonderful presentation. We are going to march for godly marriage again. All right, we will go to the union buildings again and say, not under our watch. All right,